my home. You understand?
They just arrested
Just lock me up and tell me, well, you're going for a ride for a while, you know, you ain't gonna see it for a while.
So you had a court hearing shortly after that? Or?
No. I think they had me in there for 4 days before they charged me. And then I went before a magistrate. And the magistrate remanded me to prison.
So how long were you in prison?
3 years, 2 months and 4 days.
3 years, 2 months and 4 days.
Yes.
And you weren't convicted, you were just charged?
Yes.
Wow.
Kindly be seated. A bit of special welcome to each and every one of you this morning. Once again, welcome to our monthly premier press conference. Let me bid a hearty welcome to members of Cabinet who are present with us this morning. Honorable Eric Evelyn, Honorable Spencer Brand, Honorable Hazel Brandy Williams, and of course, permanent secretaries, present morning. Members of the High Command, pleasant morning to you. And of course, you, members of the press corps, pleasant morning to all. As per usual, the format this morning, just as a kind reminder, is that the Premier will make a statement, and then you can feel free to ask a question. Question or two, that is. We are kindly asking each and every one of you to either turn your phones off, turn them on vibrate, so that you're not disturbed. In asking your questions, however, we will ask you to kindly give your name, the institution that you represent. Just in case we have to give a follow-up, have to give additional information after the press conference, we will know who to direct the answers to. Ladies and gentlemen, join me please in welcoming to the podium the Honourable Premier, Mark A.G. Brantley.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here for yet another in this series of press conferences. I thank the members of Cabinet, of course, who are here, and also thank the permanent secretaries and the members of the press and the High Command. I start with extending congratulations to the Barbados Labour Party for winning all 30 seats on the 24th of May 2018 general elections. Mia Mottley is the 8th Prime Minister of Barbados and the first woman to hold the post, and I have extended private congratulations. I now do so publicly as well. Let me also congratulate young Carlin Tuckett for making the West Indies under 15 team. I gather he'll be traveling with the team as an all-rounder, and he was just recently captain of the Leewards team, and the tournament in England, where they will be playing against the English team, is from the 6th to 20th of August 2018. So we wish Carlin Tuckett, the son of Carl Tuckett and Sonia Bowen Tuckett, all the very best, and congratulate him on his achievement. I believe there are good things in store for young Carlin, and I expect that in due course he will be on the West Indies team. And his mom is from Barbados, his dad is from Nevis. I hope he'll play as a Nevisian and not as a Barbadian. I want to also congratulate the Joyce and Library Primary School. They're winning for their winning of the annual Spelling Bee competition. The Ivor Walters Primary School took second place, while the Maud Cross Preparatory School took third place. In the secondary school section, the Charleston Secondary School took first place, while the Gingerland Secondary School took second place. I congratulate them and, of course, their teachers. Let me also, since I'm in congratulatory mood, extend congratulations to our own Jovan Swanston, the acting manager at NEVLEC. He has been elected to the Caribbean Electrical Utility Services Corporation, CARELEC, and he's been elected to their board to serve for 3 years in the first instance. Now, this is historical. It's the first time that a Nevisian is serving on CARELEC's board, and I extend heartiest congratulations to Mr. Swanston. I keep saying that Nevis is doing good things. There are good things happening in Nevis, and I think this is evidence of that. Congratulations also to our new Tourism Youth Ambassador, Mr. Ricardo Rodriguez, and he would have emerged triumphant at the Bank of Nevis-sponsored Tourism Youth Congress. Let me also congratulate the Nevis Masters cricket team for winning the Leeward Islands Masters cricket tournament over the weekend. Second place went to St. Croix, and if there are those in St. Croix who might be listening or watching, St. Croix had a good sprinkling of Division players in that team. The best wicket keeper was Mr. Joel Simmons of Nevis. The best batsman, Mr. Ardy Libert, also of Nevis. The best bowler, Mr. Patrick Newton, also of Nevis. And the MVP of the tournament, Mr. Ardy Libert of Nevis. So Nevis won every single thing for the Masters tournament. I want to congratulate the Nevis team. And just to say to the organizers, they did a fantastic job. Because the length and breadth of Nevis, I think we had cricket in St. James, at the Viewer Jane playing field. We had cricket, I believe, in Cotton Ground, cricket at ETW, and cricket in Brownhill. Those, I believe, were the grounds that were employed. And I spoke to some of the players, many of whom were former West Indies and Leewards players, and a lot of them had very high praise for the cricket grounds in Nevis and thought that we were doing a good job. And so it is useful that we continue in that vein. I want to thank the federal government for donating 30 rolls of fish pot wire to the Division fishermen for damages suffered during Hurricanes Maria and Irma. I think the fishermen were able to benefit. Each got a roll of wire, and I am to hope, and I have said to my colleague Minister in St. Kitts, Eugene Hamilton, that another 30 or even 40 rolls would be very useful and very welcome in Nevis, because some fishermen are saying that they did not benefit. So I have talked to him, and we're working together to see what more we can get. Nevis was host to the CPA post-election seminar at the Mount Nevis Hotel. I want to thank the President of the House, the Honorable Farrell Smitten, for putting this together, and we were able to get Akbar Khan, who's the Secretary General of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, who came here and hosted this very important event. I think all of us, particularly our new ministers, Minister Evelyn and Minister Brand, were exposed to parliamentary procedures and to a very robust discussion that we had. We also had, I think, members from the opposition in St. Kitts and in Nevis, members from government side on St. Kitts and in Nevis who attended, as well as the President of the House here and the Speaker of the House in St. Kitts. Let me also thank Social Security for the donation of a bus and an EKG machine to the Ministry of Health on the 18th of May. I think Madam Brantley Williams, Minister, she was there to receive this very useful donation. And I want to go on record to thank and pay homage and commendations to Social Security, because every year they have contributed in some way to the health sector in Nevis. And I want to thank them because they are dedicated to the upliftment of our people, and they have, in a very regular way, contributed to the benefit of the healthcare system here. So this year, they have donated a bus and an EKG machine, both of which were badly needed by our Ministry of Health, and we thank them for that. In terms of projects, just by way of update on those projects, the CCTV building that we've been talking about, that has commenced construction. I hope I'm correct, Minister Brand. Yes. Brownhill Road, we talked about, that has also commenced construction. And we are now in the process of a significant overhaul at the Culturama complex. That too has commenced construction. We have also seen the Newcastle Police Station, which is being financed principally by the Nevis Island Administration. That too is well under construction, and I believe the Cabinet was privileged to do a tour there, I think some 2 or 3 weeks ago, to see the progress. We intend, and I've already alerted the Minister of National Security and our Prime Minister, the Honorable Timothy Harris, to seek some federal input in relation to that construction, bearing in mind that security is really a federal responsibility and that the Nevis Island Administration has no line item in its budget for national security. That notwithstanding, the NIA has consistently shown to the men and women in uniform that we are committed to their welfare. And when we look at the Gingerland Police Station, we look at the Cotton Ground Police Station, we look at the barracks up at Bath, we look at now the Newcastle Police Station, all of them have been done at the cost and expense of the Division taxpayer. And so we have, I believe, demonstrated in word and in deed our commitment. So we are not just sitting back and waiting on the federal government, even though it's their responsibility. We are saying that we too have an obligation to keep the people of Nevis safe. And we want the police to continue to be assured that this government will partner with them and is committed to ensuring that they have the best possible environment in which to work. I was privileged to meet with the Prime Minister and with the fire officers. And there, again, we renewed our commitment. Of course, when the Newcastle police station is finished, we will have their facilities for some of the police in Newcastle. But those at the airport are also requiring relief, and we are working together with the federal government to see what we can do in that regard. So, as I mentioned that meeting with the fire officers, let me take this opportunity. I'm sure the Prime Minister, who has his press conference, monthly press conference tomorrow in St. Kitts, will also take the opportunity to stress that there is now a $30 million fund that has been created, and that is being administered through the Development Bank. It is available to civil servants, including people like the police and fire officers, and they can borrow up to $300,000 at 5% interest, which is a low interest rate. You'd have to satisfy, of course, the bank's requirements, and the limit is $300,000 EC dollars. It is not limited to first-time homeowners. You can borrow in order to add on a room on your mother's house, change a roof, do something. The bottom line is that it's a facility that is being made available to civil servants. Just this morning I had a query as to whether it applied to others who are not civil servants, and the answer is that it applies to public servants. Let me not say civil servants, sorry. Public servants, because it applies to established and non-established workers as well. So we are hopeful that people will take advantage, and that will be administered through the Development Bank, its branches in St. Kitts and, of course, in Nevis. The Financial Services Department had their 13th annual anti-money laundering and combating of terrorist financing conference at the Four Seasons Resort. I'm told they had over 200 attendees, and the reports have been excellent. I have seen reports from all over the region where people have said that the standard was second to none. And I want to commend Heidelin Sutton, our regulator, Fiola Ulubala, and the entire staff at the Nevis Financial Services Department for their excellent work in putting on this conference and in ensuring that Nevis remains at the cutting edge. I also want to thank the members of the Cabinet, all of whom attended the opening ceremony, and certainly Mr. Dorr, P.S. Dorr, who's here, our P.S. of Finance, who was instrumental in executing this particular conference. Commendations to all. I think it went extremely well. We've also had on the 24th of May, since I was last here, the official opening of our Artisan Village. And we coupled that with a culinary competition, and that was on Thursday, 24th May. The Nevis International Secondary School was the winner of the competition, and they did a phenomenal job. I believe the Charleston Secondary was second, the Gingerland Secondary was third, but the students did an incredible job creating culinary dishes for the judges to sample. And I said it so many times, I must say it again, that while some ministers were sponsors, as Premier, I exercised my prerogative to be the official taster. And so I was able to taste the dishes, and I know some people weren't happy because they were spending money to sponsor the schools and they didn't get anything to eat. But that is a matter for them. I think that it went very well, and I want to commend John Hanley, our acting PS in tourism, and the entire team for a wonderful month of activities for Tourism Expo, where we partnered with various stakeholders and like Jessup Seafood Fiesta, etc., and the Fisher Folk in Hanley's Road. And we really brought tourism to the forefront of everybody's minds. We ended the Tourism Expo with a gala event at the Four Seasons Resort on Saturday night, and we were privileged to have the presence of the Prime Minister and the Governor General, both of whom attended and graced us with their presence. And so we were quite happy. We had Colin James, the CEO of the Antigua and Barbuda Tourism Authority. He was our featured speaker, and I think the sentiment by all was that it was a gala occasion and that he did a wonderful job. I want to thank John and the entire ministry team for continued good work and for executing this very significant Tourism Expo for Nevis, where we were able to highlight all things Nevis. I think the theme was eat well, live well, be well. So it's all about wellness, and I think we did a wonderful job. The Social Development Gospel Concert. This was the brainchild of of course, the ministry and Department of Social Development, Community Development. And the rationale really was that the Bible has always been the foundation on which our federation norms and values have been built. Everyone attended Sunday school classes, and church was a social force that helped to create the very fabric of our society. In recent times, I think all of us would admit that there's been an erosion in our traditional norms and values. And this has led to an increase in crime and violence, especially among our young population. Community members have become more selfish, and social cohesion lacks and is absent in most communities. As a result of all this, the Department of Community Development sought to address the issues of crime and violence and the absence of social cohesion by encouraging community members to refocus on the Christian values that once reigned throughout our federation. It was believed and is believed that if we return to biblical principles that once guided our behavior, crime and violence will be drastically reduced. The highlight of Community Development Month's celebration, therefore, was a gospel dance and song competition and the gospel concert. Those events were designed to minister and to provide spiritual upliftment for youths and the wider community, and should, we hope, have brought about meaningful social change. So I want to simply congratulate Minister Evelyn and his team. Regrettably, I was unable to make it to the event, but I'm told that they had a bumper crowd and they had a good time. As a matter of fact, I saw a video clip, and the kind of rag waving I saw, I thought it was Juve morning for Culturama. So it suggests that even the Christian community knows how to have a good time. And so we commend them for this initiative, and I think you will see this government doing more, not less, of those types of initiatives as we try again to get our communities engaged and to get our people to understand that we need to cling more to God and to have God in all that we do and say, and we think that that will lead to a better Nevis. We had a pork festival which took place on Friday the 25th May 2018 in Charlestown, and that festival, of course, was all things pork. So they had pork for sale, they had pork sausages, they had things from the abattoir, they had stuff from those who, add value-added products. They had jerk pork, they had pork for sale, cooked or raw, and I'm told it went quite well. And I thank the people of Nevis for coming out and supporting. These are ongoing efforts of the Ministry of Agriculture. The Permanent Secretary is here, Mr. Huey Sargent, but these efforts are designed, of course, to promote local consumption. It's all part of the same notion of eating well, living well, being well. It is all part of what we're seeking to do, whether it is in agriculture, in health, or in tourism, to encourage our people to have the best possible lifestyle. Happy people lead to happy countries and productive countries. Healthy people lead to healthy and productive countries, and we're seeking to promote that. I would like to announce that Mr. Stedman Truss, our Cabinet Secretary, has been selected as the new chairperson of NEVLEC. I think as the press will be aware, we had a chairperson before who had resigned, and so Mr. Truss has accepted to chair NEVLEC, certainly initially for a 2-year period, and we will see how that goes. It's a very important institution, and certainly we hope and wish Mr. Truss a successful tenure. He is no stranger to business. He was, of course, at RBTT for many, many years as manager, and he's someone who is well known in the community, and we think that he brings value to the board of NEVLEC. I also like to announce that former, I believe, is superintendent of police. What was his rank? Deputy Commissioner. Forgive me. How could I be so unkind to say just superintendent? Deputy Commissioner of Police, Joseph Liebert. He has been named as a new chairman for NASPA, the Nevis Assistant Commissioner. I'm getting confused with the terminology. So Assistant Commissioner, not Deputy Commissioner, but Assistant Commissioner Liebert, retired, has been named, Joseph Liebert, as chairman for NASPA. And we thank Mr. Liebert for, again, being willing to serve. And we thank all board members who have come forward and have indicated their willingness to serve. The Department of Statistics is seeking the public support in the country poverty assessment that commenced on the 19th of May and will go until the 19th of December. This will, what will be entailed is a survey of living conditions plus household budgetary survey. And that will be carried out in 350 homes randomly selected in Nevis. It will help to formulate new policies and programs and be used to assess the effectiveness of present policies and social programs such as school books, assistance programs for uniforms, school meals, elderly meal program, building of low and middle income homes, and where they should be located. So it's very important that we gather this data. I know Nevisians sometimes think that people are minding their business. We're not minding your business. We just want to collect some data. 350 homes randomly selected. We're asking you kindly to cooperate with those who will come to do this survey, because this information will be critical as we make sure that the programs that we have in place are having the best effect and maximum efficacy in the areas where they're needed. So, for example, in the context of housing, it may well be that there are areas that need more housing and other areas that need less. And so this survey, we hope, will assist us in that regard. School books assistance, uniform assistance, school meals, elderly meals. Indeed, I think even the pioneering utility assistance, water and electricity for our seniors, all of this could be influenced by this survey. So it is a country poverty assessment. It is done by the Department of Statistics, and we're certainly asking for your assistance and cooperation, members of the public. Just to advise that hurricane season will officially commence on 1st June, but of course we've already had our first named storm in May, Alberto, and we're looking to a season this year which is likely to be unpredictable. They say it could be as robust as the one last year, which is not good news for us. We will shortly activate our disaster preparedness team. Minister Jeffers, of course, the Deputy Premier, is the minister charged with those responsibilities, and we encourage all of our residents to continue to heed every precaution and to get ready now. Not wait until you hear a storm is coming, but to get ready now, in the sense of ensuring that your homes are secure, your drains are cleared, guts are cleared. We are going to do our part to be sure, but we ask residents to do their part as well. I wanted to mention as well the, perhaps, how should I put it, unfortunate news, because we have to spend money on things that we hope we would not have had to spend money on. But these are commitments now that we would have made, and perhaps commitments that have now to be honored in the context of where we are as a society. And the Ministry of Education is indicating that they have invested quite heavily, and that the Charleston Secondary School is now equipped with camera surveillance, which is live, which is recording, which is being monitored. I'm told that we have 18 cameras installed there. We have the capacity to expand up to 64. The system is functional. It is recording footage at the present. It gives me a heavy heart to report that, because, of course, this is hundreds of thousands of dollars which we could have spent elsewhere. We could have bought books, for example. But here we are being forced to buy security surveillance equipment because of the behavior that we have seen in our schools. And so it is bittersweet in that sense. We are asking and continue to ask parents to do better in terms of managing their children, teaching their children the necessary values. We continue to call upon our teachers to do their best with the children that are in their care. But I think it's a sad day for Nevis when we have to install cameras at our schools. And we now have done so at the CSS, and we will quickly seek to do so at the Gingerland Secondary School as well. Notwithstanding my sadness at that, I think it also demonstrates yet again the commitment of this government in the context of safety and security and law enforcement generally, because we feel that the cameras will act as a deterrent, we hope, to bad behavior. But where there is bad behavior, we hope that the cameras will act as one of the tools to help us to unearth the culprits who might have engaged in that bad behavior. My hope would be that these cameras prove useless, in the sense that there is no one to be captured on them doing anything untoward on our school premises. So I again appeal to parents, I appeal to teachers, but I appeal to the students themselves, that they conduct themselves in such a manner that this expenditure will prove to have been unnecessary. But we have put it there because it's a commitment that we made for enhanced safety and security. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to report quickly that we have concluded the 4th edition of the Costume Design and Making Workshop that was held from May 8th to 18th. The workshop sought to equip participants with the skills to design and make costumes. It was once again facilitated by Shandy Lewis of Shandy Lewis Productions in Antigua. It is a hope that participants will be empowered to either become creative entrepreneurs, which is a lucrative business, or to use the skills to further develop and enhance our cultural and creative presentations. This year's workshops saw two significant additions. One, the inclusion of wire bending, which was facilitated by Mr. Roger Hicks out of Trinidad and Tobago. And two, the addition of a special session for staff of the Ministry of Culture, Youth, Sports, Community Development, et al., but particularly the employees at the Nevis Cultural Development Foundation. The NCDF has taken the initiative to reinstitute the Junior Parade as part of Culturama 44 activities. The workshop afforded them the opportunity to complete 22 pieces, which we will see live and in color during this parade. All the costumes will be launched for all to see on June 9th, 2018. I take this opportunity to invite all to this event as we collectively support our youth, support culture, support creativity. Additionally, we saw representatives from some of the local adult troops who also accessed the workshop, and they too will also present their designs during the launch. The Minister, of course, Eric Evelyn, he wishes to commend the departments within his ministry, Department of Youth, Culture, Culturama Secretariat, the Nevis Cultural Development Foundation, for coordinated effort in bringing this workshop to the people of Nevis. Kudos to various heads and their teams for a job very well done. Summer Job Attachment Program. The application process for the 15th edition of the Summer Job Attachment Program, hosted by the Department of Youth, was opened on May 23, 2018, under the theme, Activate, Promoting Decent Work and Economic Growth. This summer, over 60 school leavers will be exposed to the fundamentals of the world of work with a combination of theoretical and practical experiences, which we hope will prepare them to be good employees or entrepreneurs in the very near future. This government promotes opportunities for our young people, and we know that if the initial exposure to the professional world is an authentic experience with high standards, the same will follow through when they formally enter the world of work. I am therefore appealing to parents and well-wishers of school leavers, but more so to the school leavers themselves, to embrace this phenomenal opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, I end on a sad note, and that is that we woke not so long ago, a matter of days ago, with the sad news of the passing of Mr. David Freeman. Mr. Freeman, of course, was a cultural icon, a fife player beyond anything that we have ever seen in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. He was one of those, I think, who carried that tradition and that cultural art form throughout his life. Various words have been used to describe him. He was an icon, he was maestro, whatever the language. We think he lived a good life. I'm told by his son, Colin, that he passed away peacefully at the age of 90. And I would want to extend on behalf of the administration our deep condolences to his entire family, and to say that this administration will participate in a tangible way in the funeral of Mr. Freeman, and in so doing demonstrate our own commitment and obligation to honor his memory as one of those who contributed much to the life and times of the island of Nevis. I've charged Minister Evelyn to have the necessary discussions with the family to determine how we can contribute, but we intend to contribute in a tangible way to the funeral and homegoing service of Mr. David Freeman. And may his soul rest in peace, and may the prayers of the multitude comfort his family in this very difficult time. I will end there and invite questions. What I've sought to do is to give a snapshot of what has happened, but I'm sorry, I said I would end there. I've just seen a note to myself that we do come at these events monthly. We try to give a snapshot of what's going on in the various ministries. We try to give a snapshot of employment and individuals who might have been employed. I would have mentioned, of course, Mr. Tross, who is taking over as chair of NEVLEC, and former Assistant Commissioner Joseph Liebert, who's taking over as chair of NASPA. Let me also add that I'm very pleased to announce that Mr. Corey Tyson, whom we all know, a musical maestro, he will now be taking over as music instructor in our schools and at the community level as of June 5th. And we welcome Mr. Corey Tyson to the NIA and to working under the supervision of Minister Eric Evelyn. Those are my comments, and I invite questions now, if there are any for me. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Monique Washington, Stinkis Nevis Observer newspaper. Just 4.5 simple questions. Now, the ICOMOS report for the Charlestown being designated as UNESCO World Heritage Site is back, and it has been back for some time. And the ICOMOS basically concluded that they could not recommend that the nomination for Charlestown be further explored. Why to date haven't the Nevisian public been informed by the minister or the premier of the outcome of the ICOMOS position? And also, moving forward, does the government plan to follow any of their recommendations? Second question, on social media last week, I have seen persons complaining about a private property owner blocking access to the beach in the Tamarind Cove area. Now, I would have visited that site myself and noticed that there were wires on both sides blocking access to the beach with a sign that reads, "Private property, do not enter." It almost feels like we're going back in Bratcher days, but, you know, if Bratcher was here, he would have kicked down the wall, and in that area, a wall was built, and I think he did come and kick down that wall. So my question is, what action does the government plan to take against property owners that prohibit Nevisians to access of beach? On crime, in Nevis, over the past month, we would have seen dozens of robberies, whether it's armed or not armed robberies, and it appears as though they're being committed by youths. It also appears that these youths have jobs, so it can't be that it's a lack of jobs why they're doing it. So I'm coming to the conclusion that it must be a social problem. Is there any plans by the government to implement some type of mandatory social program for the youths on the island? And finally, congratulations to Mr. Truss on being the chairman for the NEVLEC board. But the last chairman, upon his leaving, would have said that, you know, he left. One of the reasons he would have given was because of political interference. What is your comment on that? And how can you ensure that the next chairman doesn't leave because of those reasons? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The ICOMOS report, I think when I was last here, I didn't dwell on it, but I did indicate that the report was not favorable. And if you check your notes, you should recall that I said that. We could not release the report because the report was being assessed by the relevant authority. I think Mrs. Evelyn Henville was the individual, and that assessment, therefore, had to be done, and then it had to go to the responsible minister. Once that was done, then I see no difficulty in having the entire report released. But you're from the Observer. I saw the Observer ran an article on the report. So obviously the Observer had access to the report in any event, and certainly would have made it public and whatever the findings were. The findings, as I understand it, you are correct, that the findings did not find that Charlestown was a site that they could recommend for what we were hoping that it could become a UNESCO World Heritage City. But I believe that there is, some guidelines that they have set out, which we think are important and that we will be looking at. In fact, the Cabinet has approved a company now out of North Carolina, I believe, to look at Charlestown and to come up with a master plan for Charlestown, which we hope that we will be able to build out in phases to deal with some of the concerns, to ensure that we have proper walking access, we have proper parking, proper green spaces, etc. So we'll be working on that very shortly. The Cabinet has already approved that, and we intend to implement the recommendations from ICOMOS as much as possible. There was a flicker of hope, however, because they did seem to suggest that the Bath Hotel site was a site that could become a World Heritage Site, so that whilst we were not able to get the recommendation for all of Charlestown, that within Charlestown, the Bath Hotel, Bath Stream site, they thought had some value. And so we're looking at that very seriously to see how we can advance that. So I want to be very clear. There is no effort on this government's part to hide or or keep information from the public, but things have to be done in a particular way. And the report had to be assessed. It had to be passed to the minister before I or anyone else went out and made any public statements on it. As it turned out, the Observer got it, and the Observer opted to go public, and that is the role of the press, and that is fine. But we had to follow our proper procedure. Access to the beach that is blocked, no reports of that have come to me as Premier of Nevis. I'm not aware, Minister Brand, planning, has anything come to planning? Okay, we'll have to check on that, but I'm not aware of any beach that has been blocked. I want to make it pellucid. All beaches in Nevis are public by law, and so all beaches must have public access by law. So there's no ifs, ands, or buts, or maybes. There's no gray area there. So beaches are public by law, and all beaches must be public. I'm happy you mentioned Bratcher. I didn't realize you were so old, Monique, that you would remember that Bratcher kicked down a wall. But I'm happy that you have such weight of historical, knowledge in your mind about Bratcher kicking down walls. I don't know. I've heard these myths as well. I don't know what Bratcher would have done or would not have done. What I will say is that on the island of Nevis, beaches are public and they will remain public. And so the public can be assured that if there's any unlawful blocking of access to our beaches, those blockages will be removed. But I have no specific information because nothing has been brought to my attention in relation to this. You mentioned crime, and you say, and I noted, dozens of robberies. I don't think that's consistent with what the police are saying to me. And, I expect the press to be a little bit more circumspect in the language that they employ. I agree we have had some robberies. I think much less than a dozen. So rather than dozens, I think we've had a few robberies. And a few is one too many. So I'm not seeking to resile from that. The police, I think, have had some success in interdicting some. Others, they have not yet done so. But I'm hopeful. And the police, I think if they're given the opportunity, they will say that I call them regularly. Because when we hear things are happening, of course, we want to know what's going on and what they're doing in response. We continue to give them our support, Inspector Mills and the entire team here, some of whom are present here with us today. Superintendent Mills, forgive me, my titles are just off today. Superintendent Mills and the force members who are here, that we will continue to give them our fullest support. And again, we continue to encourage our people to do what is right. I agree with you that people who appear to be involved in criminality, not necessarily people who are unemployed. And that lends the myth to the suggestion that poor people are the ones committing crime. People who are unemployed are the ones committing crime. Some of them who are committing crime, it appears, are gainfully employed, but are still bent on criminality. Others refuse to work, because I am persuaded that those in Nevis who want to work can find work. Work is available on the island. Jobs are up on the island. And more jobs are on the way with some of these construction, public and private sector construction activities that we see. So I think that people who want to work can find work. And I encourage people, again, to do what is right. It's a theme that you'll hear at every press conference I have. Encouraging people to do what is right. Because our people, I think, sometimes take decisions which damage them, damage the island, and can have knock-on negative consequences for all of us. And so we continue to encourage, and of course, people to do what is right, but also continue to encourage members of the public that when they see something, say something. We need their participation, we need their cooperation in fighting crime. It's one thing when I wake up Superintendent Mills out of his bed at whatever hour and say to him, I understand so-and-so happened. He is human just like me. He has to get some rest just like me. But some of us in this room, or our relatives, or those who are listening or watching, may be the ones who have the key. They hold the key to solving whatever it is, because they saw something. They notice a car. They notice an individual. And every one of us who sees something and refuses to say something is contributing to the problem of crime. And I hear all the stories. They don't trust police. They don't want to get themselves in nothing. Not me, me not go to court. Me never go to court in my life yet. But every time we stay silent, we encourage criminality in our midst. And so all of us must have somebody that we trust. You don't trust the police, trust your pastor. You don't trust the pastor, trust the elder in the church, your friend. But somehow get information. We even have the Crime Stoppers number, where your phones are answered in Canada anonymously. So really and truly, the argument that people are afraid to say something, to me, doesn't hold water. I think we need to get information. We need to cooperate with the police. And I keep saying all the time that even in the greatest countries in the world, like the United States, with all of their resources, everywhere you go in America, you see the signs up. See something, say something. They depend on the public to help the police and help law enforcement. Only in Nevis, it seems to me, that we say that's a police problem. It have nothing to do with me. So I could see the fellows robbing my neighbor's house, has nothing to do with me. But what happens when they come to rob your house? I'm sure you'd like the neighbor to say something. So we must work together, be each other's keeper, and ensure that we do what is right in that regard. Political interference, you said, the previous chairman of NEVLEC said something about political interference. I frankly don't know where that would have come from. You must ask him what political interference there was. I will not engage in that. NEVLEC is a serious company, has serious needs, and as I like to say, serious times demand serious attention from serious people. The previous chairman, in my view, was a serious individual, one who had my confidence. He opted to resign. We have asked Mr. Truss now, somebody who equally has my confidence, to proceed to provide the necessary leadership of the board for NEVLEC. And that is as much as I can say. I don't understand the notion of political interference in companies like NEVLEC, because perhaps I see political interference in this way. If a decision is made, and I as Premier call up and say, reverse that decision. If somebody is fired, and I call up and say, rehire that person, to me that is political interference. But if I say, I as Premier of Nevis need to know what is happening at NEVLEC, because ultimately when I stand here, Monique Washington from the Observer is going to ask me what is going on at NEVLEC. I don't see that as political interference. The government is the sole shareholder of NEVLEC. And I, as a minister with responsibility for NEVLEC and as Premier of Nevis, I'm entitled to information as to what is going on in the company. And anyone who is of a view that they will be chair or manager of a publicly owned entity and feel that the government should not have information as to what is happening in that entity is misguided. Misguided. The government must know, because I have said that if electricity were to go out in half of Nevis tomorrow, you think the general manager at Four Seasons, whose guests are plunged into darkness, is going to call chairman and member of the board of NEVLEC? Mark Brantley is who they're going to call, the Premier of Nevis. Mr. Brantley, what's going on? And how can I respond to the public if I don't have information? How? So I want those involved who are serving at the very highest levels of all of our public corporations to understand that they have to have a communication with their minister. They have to let their minister know what is going on. If something is happening at NCDF, the Minister of Culture should know. He shouldn't be walking down the road and somebody say, boy, you ain't hear what big bacchanal up at NCDF. He should know. If I'm the minister with responsibility for NEVLEC and half the island is going to be out of power because of some problem, the first call you should make is to the minister. In case anybody call your minister, this is what is going on. Information, sharing. I don't see that as political interference. And if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But I hold steadfastly to that view. And Mr. Truss, I believe, understands that it is not a question of any minister seeking to tell a board what to do. But the minister saying to the board, inform me of what decisions you have arrived at and the reasons for those decisions. Because ultimately, the ministers and those in the political chairs have to answer to the public. And I think that I am as plain as I can in relation to that. I think that interference, to my mind, is, as I've said, when you seek to dictate what is going on. When decisions are made and you seek to overturn decisions. When you walk up in NEVLEC office and you say, hey, you're fired, go home. You're hired. That is political interference. But if I ask, if you're firing somebody or hiring somebody, could you alert me and let me know? You're hiring Mr. Beyond. Mr. Beyond is a regular attendee at these conferences, and I want to welcome him again. But if you're going to hire Beyond, you send a little note to the minister and you say, listen, we've taken on Beyond. It happens in government. Mr. Minister Evelyn advised me that he has taken on Mr. Tyson. Does that mean that I'm politically interfering in Mr. Evelyn's ministry? No. It's just a question of communication. That's all it is. And I don't resile from that. That is a need for communication. And communication is critical in government and even the private sector. It is important. So I don't see an issue there at all, and I would challenge anybody who suggests that this government has sought to politically interfere. That would be inaccurate. So I want to be very clear in relation to that. And Mr. Truss and the board of Nevis have my commitment that I will not be politically interfering in anything that they do or in their decision making. They've been selected to make decisions in the best interest of the company. But I will not be blindsided. I don't want to walk downtown and pick up the Observer and see a headline in the Observer telling me some big thing at Nevlik that I as Minister and Premier and a representative of the only shareholder have not heard about and have no idea or information on. That, to my mind, is unacceptable. It would be unacceptable in the private sector, and it's unacceptable in the public sector. So I hope that clarifies that the Board of Nevlik has my fullest support and my commitment for no political interference in their decision-making, but they equally have a responsibility to keep me informed about what is going on. Any other questions?
Hi, good morning, St. Kitts and Nevis, Mr. Premier.
Good morning to you.
Government officials, the media, and friends and well-wishers of St. Kitts and Nevis. My name is Bjorn Hanley, and I am representing Nevis Pages. And I must express my deepest condolences to Mr. Freeman as well. He lives in the very community in which I live, Hard Times Rollins community. And Mr. Premier, I have a number of questions here for you. I'm sure you're aware of the Jamaican fugitive who was caught in Antigua several weeks ago. But the problem is, Mr. Premier, the Jamaican fugitive was living in St. Kitts and Nevis for an unknown period of time. So he must have entered St. Kitts and Nevis via airport, and then he went to Antigua, and he was caught in Antigua. So that shows me that our background checks are lacking on people who are coming into the country. And it gets even worse, Mr. Premier, because about a month ago or so, you said in this very room that you regularized 999 immigrants in Nevis. So, Mr. Premier, Monique mentioned there's a number of criminal activities in Nevis. My question to you is, how many of those 999 fugitives do you think...
Fugitives?
999 immigrants, do you think are fugitives, possibly fugitives or criminals? And my question is, if it is zero, how do you know it is zero when clearly we do not have any way of checking to see who's coming into the country, considering the Jamaican fugitive who left and came back? And integrity in public life. I was here a couple months ago, and Mr. Premier, you said to me that it will be brought into force, up and running, way before June. That's what you said, way before June. Well, June is Friday, so I don't know what way before June means anymore, because clearly June is Friday coming. So, Mr. Premier, I have a pad here. I would like a exact date from you so that I could write it down here when this bill will be up and running, because it's going around in circles now. Number 3, freedom of information. The first reading of this Freedom of Information bill was in 2013. This is 2018. And I understand that there must be some circulating of the bill before it is brought into law. Well, Mr. Premier, I had a conversation with an elderly man a couple of weeks ago, and the man was arguing with me and saying, the bill is law now. It is law because the government was in the House and they were reading the bill, and so says it passed now. So I explained to the gentleman, and the gentleman asks if it's a trick by the government to be reading the bill into the House and having circulation and back and forth. So again, my question to you now I would like an exact date as well on when this bill will be brought into force, because, again, just like the integrity in public life is going around in circles again. So an exact date from you, Mr. Premier. As mentioned, question number 4, as mentioned in the CCM manifesto, is it the intention of the government to increase the number of constituency seats from 5 to 7? And if the answer is yes, when will you start that process, Mr. Premier? I would like a month. When would you start that process? Maybe not a date yet, but I will come back and probably ask for a date and time. But for now, I would like a month on when you would start that process of increasing the constituencies from 5 to 7 seats. And probably you could tell us who the candidates, the 2 extra candidates will be as well. My guess is probably the Honorable Troy Liebert and the Honorable Hazel Brandy. My guess those would be the 2 candidates. But probably you can confirm to us. That's it for now, Mr. Premier.
Well, let me start where you ended, and it's interesting that you're naming candidates on the CCM side. So you clearly are of the view that they will be running unopposed. So that is useful. We made a commitment in the manifesto to increase the number of seats. That is something that clearly you would understand is going to take some deliberate thought and a process. I would just like to remind you, Mr. Hanley, that manifesto commitments are 5-year commitments. So while I hear you and you're asking for month and date and all of that, we are working to a plan to execute our commitments to the people of Nevis. And we will do so in our time, because we have had a mandate, in fact an overwhelming mandate from the people to do their work. And so there's a lot to be done. That is just one of the number of items that we've committed to. So I can't tell you today that it's going to start in March or April. What I will tell you is that it will happen in time. And we are only at the very start of a 5-year term. And so we have ample time within which to execute our manifesto commitments. Freedom of information. I notice when you ask your questions, you ask them with a certain degree of passion. But it would help if you have the factual matrix right when you ask. Because you're saying that we had a first reading in 2013 of freedom of information. That is incorrect. We had a first reading last month. Freedom of information legislation was introduced. The bill was introduced, the ordinance was introduced last month in the Nevis Island Assembly by this government. And the question now for us, it's last month? Yes, in April. So the question now for us is when we go back into the House now to have the debate. So in fact you misled the gentleman. You were the one trying to trick the gentleman because you didn't give the gentleman accurate information. Right? The gentleman, you should have, as a responsible member of the press, be able to say to the gentleman that the bill was only read a first time last month. And we will now have it a second reading, at which point we will have the debate. And it's only after the second and third reading does the bill then come into law by being passed and assented to by the governor. So that is the process. So there's no trickery involved. It's just that I think that you were incorrect in relation to the bill having a first reading 5 years ago in 2013. That is inaccurate and incorrect. So we are committed to that. Just so you are aware, Mr. Hanley, that we introduced the bill for the first reading, cognizant of the fact that in St. Kitts we also had freedom of information legislation winding its way through the Federal Assembly. And we only read it for the first time because we wanted that process to be completed so that we have parity. And so that one bill isn't saying something which is completely alien to the other, recognizing that certainly we have 2 parliamentary bodies, the Federal Assembly and the Nevis Island Assembly. So no trickery, no anything, just I think we get the facts straight, that the bill was read for the first time last month, and we hope that it will be read a second time very soon, because as you know, we've committed to being in the House at least once every 2 months. I think that was the commitment that we made, and so far, the commitment that we've kept. IPL, you are absolutely correct that I told you that I will have this in place well before June. I think you're entirely accurate in that. And you are correct that June is upon us. What I will say is that we've had a bit of a hold-up. As you know, to activate the IPL legislation, we need a 3-member commission. We need a chair who is appointed by the Deputy Governor General in her own deliberate judgment, and that chair has to be a retired judge or a lawyer with at least 15 years' experience at the bar. And then there's a member appointed on the advice of the Premier, a member appointed on the advice of the leader of the opposition. I have been in touch with Mr. Parry, the lone member of the opposition, and he told me that he needed some time to consider. He has since got back to say that he has made a recommendation as a nominee. So I couldn't control that in terms of timing. I wrote, I think when I was here about 2 or 3 months ago, to indicate that I had written, but certainly he had a right under the legislation to appoint and to consult, and he has now advised that he has done so. I have nominated for appointment our nominee, and the chair, I think, is where we have hit a bit of a snafu, because there was a chair whom I think had been approached by the Deputy Governor General and had agreed. And so I had hoped, since last time we were here, to have announced the formation of the committee and the members, of the commission, and the members. But regrettably, that chair has since indicated that they are not willing to act. So we've had to go back to the drawing board, so to speak, to get that. So it is not for want of appetite for the commission or want of urgency on the part of the government, but the government can only push so far. Under the legislation, there are other people who have to do something, and certainly the Deputy Governor General is now going through to try and select a chair. My hope would be that long before we have another press conference, we'll be able to announce the commission. Once the commission is in place, Mr. Hanley, then the commission then comes up with the budget in order for the Integrity Commission to function. So I am still minded that I think June 18th is 6 months. The commitment I made was to have it functional within 6 months. And I'm hopeful that I can achieve that, because I wouldn't want to start off by breaking my promises. But just to explain that it hasn't been for want of effort. We have tried. And when we thought we had everything sorted, the chair indicated that they could not proceed. And so we have to go back in relation to the chair, because clearly you can't have the commission without the chair. You talk about the Jamaican fugitive. I think there's, again, a need for us to be careful how we disseminate information, because the High Command in St. Kitts, Nevis, has indicated that they had no knowledge that this individual was wanted in Jamaica. So before we say that the system failed, in the sense that a fugitive was allowed to come into the country, if there is nothing that has been communicated to us, then that individual would not have been flagged. Put differently, if Tom Jones is wanted in Trinidad for murder, but the Trinidadian authorities have not alerted through the regular channels, the JRCC in Barbados and other regular channels, all of the police authorities in the Caribbean, then it is incorrect to say that because he entered Nevis, the systems in Nevis failed. Because all the systems in Nevis would show is that Tom Jones has arrived from Trinidad. The obligation was on the Jamaican authorities to alert all of the Caribbean, and they did not, based on what the High Command has indicated, and the Minister of National Security has said publicly, they did not alert the authorities in St. Kitts Nevis that this gentleman was a wanted fugitive. Apparently, when he got to Antigua, Antigua had more information than we did, and so he was apprehended in Antigua. So it really is not fair to say it was a failing of the system here, because if he wasn't flagged, then the system would not treat him otherwise than an ordinary passenger arriving from Jamaica, a fellow CARICOM country. You said that we regularized 999 persons. I think that's a number I got from the PS, Mr. Wakely Daniel. And you say, well, you use the language of fugitive. I think that was an error your part. It perhaps betrayed the way you were thinking, but an error on your part. These are, and I don't want to say that all 999 were necessarily people who were irregular. I want to be very careful about that. 999 is a global number of people who came in during that period, some of whom would have been irregular, and some of whom we would have offered the amnesty, who would have taken advantage and regularized their status. You ask how many of those might be criminals. Can I say that none of them are criminals? I can't say who's a criminal from who's not a criminal until, of course, they're investigated by the police and found guilty of some crime. What I will say is that as part of the process for work permits in particular, we do get the police report. And the police will indicate whether or not this person is known to the police. And you know, when the police say they know you, they don't mean that they know that you're beyond handy. They know you meaning that you have had occasion to to interact with the court system or interact with the criminal justice system. So we do have a vetting process that is in place. It is one that has worked well over the years. If people are coming from overseas coming in, they have to provide necessary police report to us, and we look very carefully at that. So, Mr. Hanley, I can't give any guarantees because none of us can. Sometimes, of course, those who are involved in criminal activity are the ones you least suspect. And so I don't know. I'm not a soothsayer. I'm not a mind reader. I can't tell all of whom would be involved in criminal activity. And so I can't give it a guarantee you're asking for. What I can tell you is that we have a vetting system, and all of these people would have gone through that system and would only be approved if their names were clear, in the sense that not being known either to the police here or to the police in the countries of origin. So that is as much as I could say in relation to that.
Mr. Premier, good morning. Good morning to everyone. German Abel of SKN Vibes. You spoke about the work at the ongoing works at the cultural complex. Can you just give us some more information in terms of the overall cost of the work, the scope of the work, and so forth there? Can you go a little more into details with regards to the preparedness and what the NIA will be implementing in relation to the hurricane season? Because we know that's Friday and hurricane season practically has started already. On the national front, going back to the scandal involving that St. Kitts and Nevis and Antigua has been embroiled in, we've seen that there's been calls for the Prime Minister to resign. Do you believe that the government that the CCM and yourself is a part of is being held at a different standard to that of the former government? And has there been any talk within Cabinet of a possible resignation from the Prime Minister? And another question, there's been consistent complaints recently about an increase in electricity bills, and that is with regards to the fuel charges. Can you confirm or deny whether or not there's been an increase that's been passed on to consumers with regards to the fuel charges? And the final question, is the government, by extension, both on St. Kitts and Nevis, concerned, going back to the question that Mr. Handley asked with regards to fugitives, are you concerned that with there being a breakdown in communication among member states in the Caribbean, in terms of passing information on that more criminals would be hiding out in St. Kitts and Nevis? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions. Short answer to your last question is I don't know. I think that the best of systems from time to time have lapses. I don't know that if it suggests that there is any overall breakdown in the system. It was unfortunate with this Jamaican fugitive that we did not have the information, but I'm hopeful that with better communication that problem will be avoided in the future. So I am not panicked about it. I think that we just have to treat these matters in a sensible and practical way, that from time to time there is a lapse in information, and we will just have to continue to do the best that we can and to ensure that we share information, those countries in the region with us and us with them. In relation to increase in electricity charges, I'm not aware that there's been an increase. What I will say is that oil prices generally are trending upwards again. And the fuel surcharge, remember, is a mechanism that seeks to pass those charges through to the consumer. So that's why this whole reason of the fuel surcharge was developed. In Nevis, we have over the years lowered the fuel surcharge to bring some relief to customers. But I have not had any report from NEVLIC that electricity charges generally are trending upwards in any significant way. I think from time to time as the fuel on the world market, diesel goes up and down, then you'll have fluctuations in terms of people's utility bills. So that has not been brought to my attention, and I think I will get the necessary reports from NEVLIC. I have not heard in St. Kitts either at the federal level that there has been any significant uptick in the cost of electricity. But I think the public has to be aware that if oil prices continue to rise on the world market, then there is, of course, a consequence, because those charges are normally passed through the fuel surcharge mechanism to the consumer. So when we hear oil prices are trending up, we can generally expect that our electricity bills will trend up, and that is why we continue to do two things: the press on renewables such as geothermal, solar and the like, and two, to encourage our people to conserve energy as much as possible, and so take charge of how much they spend by conservation. You mentioned the hurricane season and preparedness. I think that each year, and I want to commend Mr. Brian Dye and the entire team, we do a commendable job in Nevis, and I think they do a commendable job in St. Kitts as well. Of course, I'm more familiar with Nevis, of preparing the public. And they do that by way of ensuring that shelters are ready, shelters are in good order. We have just partnered with the Japanese government, which has repaired shelters here in Nevis. I can think of the shelter in Bath, for example. The Alberta Payne Community Center went through a whole repair. I can think of a retaining wall that was done in the Fenton Hill area by the Japanese as well, because that was prone to flooding and mudslides. So we have prepared ourselves. I think all the shelters, we do the checks, and I believe when I said earlier that the season is now starting and our disaster preparedness folks will be out, that is part of what they'll be doing. Through Public Works, we'll be looking at ensuring that our guts and ravines, the water runoff areas are clear, and of course we continue to clear the trenches and ensure that the sides of the road and all of that are clear. We, however, ask homeowners to take their own safety and security into account and to ensure that their homes are in good order. So where they have windows that are broken, they have to ensure that they can secure their homes. If there are roofs that are leaking, they have to ensure that they can secure their homes. So we'll continue our efforts in terms of the public awareness, the campaign for people to get ready for what might happen, and of course to ensure that our public facilities, our shelters, are in good order. You mentioned a scandal with St. Kitts, Nevis and Antigua. And you say, is there any talk? Well, certainly conversations in cabinet, as you know, are privileged and confidential, but I'm not aware, let me put it that way, of any discussion about any resignation of anyone. I think the Prime Minister's name has surfaced in articles in the UK, and the Prime Minister has spoken for himself, as he ought to, in relation to that. He has said that he did nothing wrong, and that there are no allegations in relation to him. I believe that we would all have heard him with our own ears defending himself in that regard. I have said publicly that these are matters that have been raised in relation to named individuals, and it is for those named individuals to say to the public whether something happened, if something happened, what happened. And I think the Prime Minister has spoken for himself in that regard. And I'm not aware of any discussions, whether within or without Cabinet, about any resignations of anyone. So I hope that that answers the specific question that you would have had on that.
With regards to the question of whether or not the current Team Unity administration, which you're part of, is being held at a different level, or is being adjudged at a different level to that of the former administration, which is basically pushing for the Prime Minister to resign?
Well, I think we're being held at a much higher level, as we ought to be. So I think the standards now are higher, and we're being held to higher standards, and I agree that we are to be held to the highest possible standards. The standard for the previous guys was very low, because if it were any higher, I think many of them would have had to have resigned. So that is probably part of the problem now, that those who are crying out and saying that people should resign have no moral authority to demand that anybody resigns because of their own conduct when they were in office. And so, you know, the old adage about the wrong messenger, and that is part of the problem now. The messengers who are making the most noise are ones who have indulged themselves in such egregious activity when they were in office that I think that the public out there is not listening, because the public is saying, how you could come demanding somebody resign when you did this, that, or the other. And I don't need to get into all of those scandals. I think that the press is very well aware of them, but the previous administration was plagued with one thing or another. And so I think that is part of the debate now. Much of this, as we understand, is in the political realm. But I believe that this unity administration is being held to a higher standard, and I agree that we ought to be held to a higher standard, the highest possible standards for governance and transparency. And that is what certainly on the Nevis side of things we're seeking to do for the CCM government, that we put the necessary framework in place where there's integrity in public life, freedom of information, ensuring that the public has the tools. And as I continue to say to my ministers inside and outside of government, that we are here to serve others, not ourselves. And that we continue to maintain the highest possible standards of behavior. I realize I missed one of your questions. You asked about the cultural complex. The work there is going to be larger to deal with the seating and the roof, which is over the main stage area. We're working on that because there were some leaks and some difficulties there. I'm told that the overall project is at a cost of about $500,000. That is what we are spending. We have 2 contractors there. We have a 3rd contractor who's going to be doing some additional work, but we did not think we'd have enough time to do that additional work. That is in time for Culturama this year. And so that contractor, I'm told just this morning, will do some cosmetic work and then leave some of the major works until after Culturama. But either way, we have last year, as you know, spent some $1.7 million on the cultural village, which I now think is really state-of-the-art, something that we can boast about, that can host any kind of show here. And we will now be spending in this phase about $500,000 on the cultural complex, where we have most of the Queen shows and Calypso shows and the like. So the whole idea is to create a better environment for patrons when they come so that they can enjoy the Culturama festivities. And Minister Evelyn has promised that we're going to have the biggest Culturama we've ever had for this year. And so we look forward certainly to the support of one and all.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Premier Brantley, Jarvis Brown, Vaughan Radio. 4 questions regarding the Freedom of Information Bill. Will the NIA be looking to implement this bill as soon as possible? And as a follow-up question, the bill states, and I quote, that it seeks to give members of the public a general right of access to official documents of public authorities, subject to limited exceptions and for matters related thereto. Now, the question is, what are these exceptions in which I just cited? Now, regarding the National Assembly Elections Amendment Bill 2017, which was given its first reading on March 20th, 2018, will the NIA also look to implement a similar bill? If so, why? And the final question, is the NIA looking to implement traffic lights on the island? That's it, sir.
Okay, traffic lights, no. We don't see any value in traffic lights on Nevis at this point in our development. We kind of like Nevis the way it is, in the sense of what we have to offer. I think it's a very special and unique place. And I think you get more press out of having something with quirky, which says monkey crossing, than you get from traffic lights. So Nevis is a unique destination, and we don't think that there's a need to consider that. So my answer to that is no. In relation to the National Assembly Elections Amendment Bill, you should know that elections are federal. And so there's no question of the NIA passing its own legislation. When legislation is passed to deal with elections, it is always federal. So what applies in St. Kitts applies in Nevis insofar as the rules are concerned. We only have, for example, 1 supervisor of elections for the entire federation. So it's one of those areas that is under the control of the federal government, and therefore any legislation passed federally would apply to Nevis as well. I have said publicly, as Premier of Nevis and as leader of the Concerned Citizens Movement, that some of the changes need public consultation. In fact, we have committed to that, and I know that there's some diaspora groups in North America and elsewhere who have already started to do surveys and the like to elicit the views and opinions. We have major groups out there. I can think of NevCan, for example, in Canada. I can think of NevDC in Washington, D.C. I can think of Hearts and Hands in New York. These are all very vibrant groups that are very connected with St. Kitts and Nevis. And so the question of, for example, the overseas vote and what happens in relation to those folks who have had a right to vote since 1984, and whether or not that right is taken away now or that right is continued, those to me are fundamental questions which go to the essence of who we are as Kittitians and Nevisians and ought to be the subject of some consultation. And so, insofar as my position and the CCM's position, the NIA's position is concerned, that these are matters that the public should have a view on. And so we are pleased that the legislation is introduced only for the first reading, so as to give time for members of the public to share their views. And I have gotten a lot of views already. I've received a lot of views already from members in the diaspora. And some of them are quite interesting. Some of them are saying that they ought not to have the right to vote. Others are saying, listen, I pay taxes in Nevis. I have land in Nevis. I have house in Nevis. One chap wrote and said he's in Nevis 5 to 6 times each year. He has a business here. How are you going to tell him that he can't vote? Because if the government increased taxes, he has to pay those. So you have a mixed bag of views. And I am aware, for example, certainly I can speak from the perspective of the concerned citizens movement, we have a lot of Nevisians who pay their way every election and come down to exercise their franchise. Because many of them say, I'm only in America or in England passing the time. I'm there to make a living. But my home is Nevis. My home is St. Kitts. They see themselves as being inextricably connected. Many of them have not even bothered to become U.S. citizens. They have a green card. They hold on to that green card for 40 years. Because in their mind, their home is St. Kitts Nevis. That person is a different animal to one who only looking for a free trip to come down to Lyme for 2 days and vote and enjoy themselves. So it is, I think, important that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, that we look very carefully at these issues, because, as I said, unlike any of the other countries in the region that I'm aware of, St. Kitts Nevis and nationals of St. Kitts has had this right since 1984. So that is now for virtually all of our life as an independent country, our citizens have been accustomed to voting in our local elections, even though they live in St. Martin or Antigua or wherever they might live. So we have said that consultation is the way to go, and hopefully we arrive at a consensus at the end of that process where we can pass much needed reform for our electoral system. But it will be federal in nature. That is the way it works. Freedom of information, yes, we intend to proceed with some alacrity in relation to that. I think that and integrity in public life together should provide some measure of comfort to the public and should help us to honor our campaign commitment that we will usher into being a more transparent government and a government which is a hallmark of good governance. And so we want to demonstrate that, and so we will proceed with some alacrity. Right of access to members, you say, what would some of those restrictions be? I would anticipate, just off the top of my head, that, for example, if something has to do with national security, there's information, for example, about the police or a particular operation, that might be something that we will not reveal. If there's something that is personal to an individual, maybe it's a contract or a report of an illness or something of that nature. I'll give you an example. The government often gets very sensitive information about individuals who apply to the government seeking assistance because they're ill and they have to go overseas for medical attention. So documentation such as that certainly would not be documentation that members of the press could call and say, oh, we hear Monique is sick, we want to see what happened to her. Could you provide those documents to us? That is, again, off the top of my head, something that I think, say would be privileged and therefore would fall within the exemption. But other information such as, a road is being built, how much the road costs, who got the contract to build the road, were there bids, etc. I think that is the type of information that is anticipated. So that the public and the members of the press, as we like to say, the fourth estate, you will have the necessary information to hold the government accountable. And we want to be held accountable. We hold ourselves accountable, but we want the public and the press also to hold us accountable. So that is the intention of this legislation. Any other questions? Mr. Hanley?
This is in regards to Peter Verdi and the bribery scandal. Several weeks ago on your radio show, Mr. Premier, you said perhaps the Prime Minister should answer to these charges. He is the only one who could answer to these charges. Well, the Prime Minister said in a recent town hall meeting in Tabernacle he will not answer to anybody. And he is not resigning today, tomorrow, next week, or next year. So clearly the Prime Minister is not listening to the Premier of Nevis. And Mr. Premier, you also said on the radio show you have no intention of being Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis. And at the town hall meeting, the Prime Minister said he will serve for 10 years. He wants 10 years of service from the people. So the Prime Minister he said he's not a one-man party, but clearly he has one seat in St. Kitts. So my question to you, Mr. Premier, if the Prime Minister is going to serve 10 years of service, he will need the help of the people of Nevis to give him 10 years of service. So in the next election, if the CCM win probably 2 or 3 seats, can you confirm that you will take those Nevis seats to St. Kitts to give the Prime Minister, Dr. Harris, 10 years of service in order, and your intention is not to be Prime Minister, so you will be giving, will you give those the Nevis seats to St. Kitts to give Dr. Harris 10 years of service so that you could remain Premier of Nevis and secure your federal job in St. Kitts at the same time? Is that your intention, Mr. Premier? Okay. And also, I am aware that you were in court last week facing defamation charges. These are very serious charges, defamation of character. Premier of Nevis is in court facing defamation charges. So we would like to know exactly who is suing the Premier of Nevis and how much money that person is suing the Premier of Nevis. And in the interest of freedom of information, will the general public see those court transcripts of that court matter? Because this is not, you are not a private citizen, you are the Premier of Nevis. So in the interest of freedom of information, can you confirm that we will be seeing those court transcripts so that we could know what is happening in court with these defamation of character charges against the Premier of Nevis? It's a very serious charges. So we would like you to answer to us, sir.
Okay, Mr. Hanley, again, you know, I keep saying so, not to be facetious, but your line of questioning would be measurably enhanced if you just informed yourself of the facts. You know, not just come with the rhetoric, but if you understood that which you were talking about, I think the questioning would be more meaningful. You ought to know, for example, that court transcripts are matters for the public. It has nothing to do with freedom of information. We have no freedom of information legislation currently in place in Nevis, but anybody can go to the court and get information as to what is going on in court. So don't conflate the two, because the two are unconnected. You say that I have been sued as Premier. That is as well inaccurate. If you are aware of the lawsuit, and I, in fact, through Mervyn Hanley, who does some press work for the Premier's office, we did put something out to say that 2 days of my very valuable time was being spent in court to deal with a defamation matter. That refers to comments that would have been made since 2009. I only became Premier last year. So the Premier is not being sued. Mark Brantley is being sued. So again, it is improper as if to say that as Premier I would have said something that has resulted in me being in court. That is not the case. In 2009 I wasn't even in government. 2009 I was a member of the opposition, and I made some comments of Mr. Dwight Cozier, and Mr. Cozier has decided that those comments were defamatory of him, and Mr. Cozier has taken me to court the same way he has, I think, maybe another 10 or 12 people in court at the moment. So that is the nature of that, and the lawyers will deal with that. I don't think that is a matter that ought to trouble the country, because I can tell you, Mr. Hanley, I'm not troubled about it. You ought to know that as a lawyer, I don't, and I've never really lost too many matters in the court, you know. So it's an area that I feel comfortable in, and I think that Mr. Cozier will be Mr. Cozier. I think we all know who Mr. Cozier is, and Mr. Cozier has decided that he wants to go to the court. That is his right. Any of us can take somebody to court. It doesn't ultimately translate into, as you say, serious charges. All right? So let's not agitate and get to a point that we can't reach insofar as the facts. So that is what is happening there. Nothing, I think, for anybody to get too excited about. We'll see what the judge says in the fullness of time. Dr. Harris saying that he will do 10 years of service as Prime Minister. That is consistent with what Unity committed to. Unity said that we would have term limits and that people would only be allowed to do 10 years, 2 terms as Prime Minister. And this was a departure from what was, because certainly prior to him, we had a Prime Minister for nigh 20 years, and prior to him, we had one for about 14 years or so, if memory serves. So the truth is, 12 years, 1983 to 1995, 12 years. So the truth is that this is his commitment that Unity said, and so he's saying that he would do 10 years. I see nothing wrong with that, because that is consistent with the position that the Unity had certain tenets that we agreed to, and that was one of them, that any one individual would not be allowed to go beyond 2 terms, which is 10 years. You asked me what I'm going to do with the 3 seats. I think you predicted that the CCM will have 3 seats to go to St. Kitts. What am I going to do with those 3 seats? I'm asking the people of Nevis to vote for us based on the plans and programs that we put forward during that election, and then we will be able to tell them what we are going to do. So we are going to campaign. There will be a manifesto, no doubt. We will meet with our people, we'll talk to our people, and I think when that bell is rung, our people will know exactly what we intend to do in relation to the 3 seats. And I'm happy, Mr. Hanley, with your prediction. I think you're a political pundit, so you do realize that the CCM will take the 3 seats, and we will work with those 3 seats, ultimately to strengthen the position of Nevis. Because that's who we represent. 9, 10, and 11 are Nevis seats. We represent the people of Nevis, and all of our efforts must be to see how we can strengthen the relationship for the benefit of those whom we represent, our constituents, who are 9, 10, and 11, the people of Nevis. And that is what we intend to do. Peter Verdi, I think you've brought that issue up again. I think the member of the press before you did equally. I don't know what else you would wish for me to say. The Prime Minister went to a meeting in Tabernacle, and the Prime Minister, I heard him say that he did nothing wrong. Nobody bribed him. He did not accept any bribe from anyone, and he's not resigning. And I think that in that context, you said he has refused to answer. I think he has provided his answer. You may not agree with his answer. It may not be the answer that you would want, but he has provided his answer. And so far as I'm concerned, as I've said, I was not privy. I don't know who Mr. Verdi is. I've never met the gentleman, never had any contact with him. And that is what I was trying to convey, to say that only the Prime Minister can speak to that, because he clearly would have been the one whose name was mentioned, and he has now spoken. And so it will be a matter for the press, and certainly a matter for those engaged in this whole issue of Mr. Verdi. But so far as I'm concerned with the governance of Nevis as Premier, ensuring that my team and I are doing the best that we can for the people of Nevis, and certainly ensuring that the ministries that have been entrusted to my care at the federal level are performing at an optimum level for the benefit of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. And in that light, I believe all of us would have seen the recent Henley and Partners index, which says that the St. Kitts and Nevis passport is now the most powerful passport in the Eastern Caribbean, and 3rd most powerful in the region, behind only the Bahamas and Barbados. I think that is significant, and it bears out the tremendous work that we've been doing in diplomacy. Oftentimes, when an announcement is made that we have a visa waiver agreement with some country, and I hear people say, nobody want to visit Bolivia. We come talking about Brazil. Nobody want to go to Brazil. We need to appreciate that each of those visa waiver agreements expands the network and increases the strength and the value of the passport of St. Kitts and Nevis. And I'm very, very pleased that since I have been Foreign Minister, we've been able to add 14 new countries to our visa waiver network. And that is why today we have over 150 countries that we can visit without a visa. So we shop with our passport, and we are allowed entry for up to 90 days. And that is significant, and that is what is feeding this whole rise of the St. Kitts and Nevis passport and the power of it. So there's some method to the perceived madness of going around the world and being able to negotiate these. It also demonstrates that countries around the world, big and small, when a country the size of Russia is going to sit with St. Kitts Nevis and say, we are going to allow your citizens to come into Russia free of visas. It tells you that countries have confidence in the government here. And so I think that that too is also important. What we have done in terms of visa waiver and in terms of new countries that we've developed relations with, well over 20 new countries. So it means that our stature is growing, our footprint is being enlarged, and the consequence of that is that our passport and the value is being enhanced. And my objective is, I believe in this term, to make the St. Kitts Nevis passport the most valuable in all of the Caribbean. Right now we're in third place, behind Bahamas and Barbados. I think that we can get to first place, and that is the intention, and that is what we're working towards. Any other questions?
Good morning. I represent in the...
Can't hear you.
Good morning. I represent in the youth of the world and of my church. And the question I have to ask is, number one, what do you think about teenage pregnancy that affecting the Federation? And number two, what do you think about the abortion? Number three, what do you think about sex and drug abuse? And number four is I'm going to deal with the problem in school is this, Mr. Premier, is that I have promised someone in the school that I will uphold the law of St. Kitts and Nevis, and that I will bring the word of God in the school for them. And this is what I'm planning to do, Mr. Premier, is that I promise to have a program for the schools and for the students in the school. And the program I'm planning to have is a friendship bond between the students and between St. Kitts and Nevis. It's a friendship bond between them and God. And the next question I'm going to deal with is sex and drug abuse affecting the Federation. And the next one, I'm going to deal with the prayer session in the school and prayer session and prayer and fasting in the school. And number 16, the prayer fissure affecting the Federation. Thank you.
Okay, well, you have mentioned a lot of things. You've asked me for my views on a number of things. I think if you're here from the start, you would have heard me say that the community development has just put on this gospel concert. It is one of the responses that we have been making to crime and violence in the community, and to try and inject more of God and godly teachings that we all know. I think most of us at my age would have done some time in Sunday school and some time in church. And so we want to see how we can get back to that and do more of that. Christianity, but of course there are other faiths as well. But to have more faith-based instruction and more faith involved, even in the government, in terms of what we do. So I think that what you're proposing would be welcomed. I would suggest that you speak to the necessary officials in the Ministry of Education and the Department of Education to partner with them. We would welcome more prayer. We would welcome fellowship. I think I noted you say you want a fellowship bond between students of St. Kitts and Nevis and God. You're not going to get any complaints from me in relation to that. Sex and drugs, drug abuse, sexual abuse, these are all matters that certainly we are concerned about, that continue to be a part of our society that we need to address, and that we are trying to address through various social services and various interventions in the school and elsewhere, in the homes, in families, at-risk youths. We continue to make our best efforts in that regard. But again, here's an area where individuals like yourself and members of the community, the churches, the various community groups can play a part. You asked me of my views in relation to abortion. You're taking me into some very difficult areas. What I will say is my own views. This is not a matter that has come to our cabinet for a view. from a government point of view. My own perspective on many of these things is influenced by my own personal beliefs, which I perhaps ought not to engage in since this is a Premier's press conference. So perhaps if you ask me outside, I'll tell you what my own personal view might be. But I would not want it to be said that it's a government view, because certainly none of this has been canvassed before the government and the Cabinet of Ministers. Teenage pregnancy is a problem. It continues to be a problem. It's a problem that has been with us from time immemorial. It continues to be a problem that is with us. And what I continue to do, because I don't blame the teenage girls, for example, I blame the men, because too many adult men continue to prey on young girls. And our law says that you have to be 16 years old in order to consent to sexual activity. So if you're 13 or 14 and you're sure pregnant, somebody should go to jail for that. And I continue to say so. So the officers are here. You all know my view on this. If people are showing up pregnant at 13, some man should go to jail for that. If, of course, they fall within the category of the person who is not a fellow school child, for example, because that happens at times as well. But if grown men are out there interfering and preying on young girls, then I think that the law needs to do what the law needs to do in that regard. And too often I find that young girls are getting pregnant at 13. By the time they're 14 or 15, they have another child. Another soul gone to jail. Nobody's charged, nobody's prosecuted. It just goes on as business as usual. And I think when we turn a blind eye to those things, they become the norm. And so we need to do all in our power to ensure that the law is enforced in that regard. Any other questions for me? Yes. Okay. Mr. Hanley, just before you ask your next question, as I was talking about the relevance of diplomacy in terms of what we do, I was just passed a note, and I don't know how I forgot to say that, but I would like to also announce that St. Kitts Nevis has been removed from the European Union blacklist. And that for us was very important. We were first advised in April that we would be placed on a St. Kitts Nevis, on a European blacklist, and an EU blacklist. And we were advised just last week, I believe Friday, that we have now been removed from that list. That was due to intense lobbying in terms of diplomacy. It was also due to certain commitments that we gave in terms of reform of legislative framework here in order to ensure that we meet what the EU is saying is their concern. So I think that, again, is good news for us, because blacklists clearly are bad for our reputation and bad for our banking and financial services sector. Mr. Hanley?
All right, Mr. Premier, I have a Culturama question here. We are aware there's a lot of work going on at the Culturama complex now. Why is it every year the government wait until the last minute to start all this work? Culturama is just around the corner. Is it what is the cost of this project? Because clearly the government is going to spend a lot of money in overtime charges, and so you're going to have a lot of people making a lot of money off of overtime doing this project. And who has the contract for this? What is the cost of it? And also, I understand that we have a problem with contestants, a shortage of contestants. So will the government relax their policy of not allowing Kittitians to participate in the Culturama shows, Queen shows, Calypso shows, and the rest shows? Because Mr. Abbo was on radio and he got a lot of licks from St. Kitts. People were calling in on Freedom FM, and they were not happy at all, because Nevisians are able to participate in these shows in St. Kitts, and we are not returning the favor. And this is a unity government, so they want to know, well, if this is real unity. Because if this is unity, people from St. Kitts should be able to come over and participate in this show. Because in the last administration, I don't think I had a unity government, and this was allowed. So will you relax that policy in the spirits of unity, Mr. Premier? And also, what's the status of the hospital up there? I don't know. I don't know if they're doing much work up there, but I was told, or some months ago, I saw something that they're doing construction up there at the hospital. Is there a completion date, and what is the cost of that, and who has that contract? Thank you.
Okay, let me start with the last question. The hospital is underway. It is a project that we've talked about for some time. As you know, we had quite a delay in the start, but the contractors up there, Wedge Pemberton and Clive Evelyn, those were the two contractors that were selected after a thorough bidding process. The overall cost, I think, Mr. Brand, the first phase is about $10 million, right? The overall job, I think, is going to be just under $20 million. But the first phase is about $10 million, and that has now started in earnest. That is what I'm advised. Contestants, you say you understand there's a difficulty with contestants. This is Nevis, and we understand from time to time things may be slow in happening, but I've been assured by the minister and by the team that we have a full roster of contestants for each of the shows. So that rumor is not accurate, and I would hope that you would join us, Mr. Hanley, in encouraging the young people in particular to get involved, because Culturama is not a political event. Culturama belongs to all of us. It is each year the celebration, the culmination of our culture. It is a pinnacle for us each year. Everything climaxes for Culturama. That's when we bring all of our folklore, our food, and everything else together, our music, and we showcase that to the world. And so it belongs to us. We're celebrating 44 years this year, and I think that it is something that we ought to take a page out of the book of Keith Scarborough, MBE. He's somebody who has participated in every single Calypso show that we've had for Culturama. And that type of commitment is what I'm looking for, because it really says this is not about who's in office. He sang during NRP time, he sang during CCM time. This is about a commitment to culture, and I think that is why earlier I would have referred to someone like David Freeman, because these are people who are icons. They're committed to it, and I think that is important, that we encourage our people to take part, and rather than to sit back and sit and criticize, they can't get no girls. They can't get this, they can't get that. Let us all. It's our culture. It belongs to us. And I think we need to engage in that. You asked me, what else did you ask me now? You asked me about the project up at the cultural complex. I want to say to you that project, I just said a minute ago that the first phase looks like it's going to be about $500,000. That is what we have budgeted for that phase. The contractors, there's Alexis, what does he carry? Libert, out of Church Ground, and there's Hall. What's Hall's correct name? Elijah Brown. A good Christian name, Elijah. And Elijah Brown. Those are the two contractors who were selected, and I think Tip Top Construction, the fellow we call Gagu from Don Hanley's Road, he's going to do some work, but his phase is going to come after culture. That's what we were saying could not be completed in time for Culturama. You say last minute, I suppose that's one view of looking at it, but I think what we ought to say is, when is the job going to be finished? And we are assured that the project will be done in time for Culturama, just as the cultural village was done in time for Culturama, that the cultural complex will be finished in time for Culturama. Was there another question? I was taking some notes, but I seem to... No, I think that's it. Okay. Any other questions for me? No? All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if there are no other questions for me, I want to thank you all for being here. This, as I keep saying, is part of our commitment to engage with the members of the press each month on a monthly basis. I recognize that I have not been consistent in terms of the time nor the date. I apologize for that, but a lot of that has to do with just the rigors of work. And I thank the members of the press from both Nevis and St. Kitts who continue to come on board and to assist. I also want to thank NTV who are here, but also to thank Von Radio. And I'm told Freedom FM, which has come on board for the first time today to carry the press conference. And so our intention is to come and to try to be forthright and direct in our answers. And we certainly look forward to an ongoing engagement with the press, where the press can be assured that the government is bringing accurate information, and you, the members of the press, hopefully with accurate information, can better do your job of informing the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. So thank you very much for being here, and may God bless you and grant you journey's mercies as you go back to your workplaces and business places. Thank you.